which appeared quite recently as the response to the events taking place in the frontline areas. And while planning this conference, we base ourselves upon the logic during the first panel discussion. The problem should be in the focus of our attention, then proposition how to proposals how to resolve those problems, and during the third panel discussion to return to the ideas of our new Ukrainian art workers, art figures. And we would wanted to present the Svitlograd project during this third discussion, which was born here at the UCMC, and the cultural diplomacy between inter-regional diplomacy project. And we were pleasantly surprised that not only ourselves we came up with this creation of the new museum, a virtual or movable or mobile museum or some kind of other museum, which would be aimed to restore those museums from the time immemorial to the present day. But those projects, there are only a few, and maybe those which you're going to hear about, maybe those do not exhaust the whole list of those which exist. So if you know more about that, so please inform us of that. And maybe some of our colleagues are still are not present here, but we would like to start with the Slovyansk local art history ethnography museum. This is kind of our dear to us museum. When we go to Slovyansk, first of all, we go to this museum, and the director of this museum is going to tell us what changes, what has changed over the last period of time. So we have limited time, and please do not speak too fast, because we have a simultaneous translation, and a lot of people follow us on YouTube. I represent here the city of Slovyansk. For your understanding of our territory, what we are doing, because Donbass is associated with the coal mines and the ruins. Our city is different. It's not something different from the general idea of the Donbass. This is the resort city, actually. So you can see the first slide, Slovyansk. You can see here Slovyansk, the shell fragments somewhat damaged this, the entrance to our entrance gate, as we call it, to our city, was the name of the city. Now, I'm going to show to you those unique lakes with the mineral water and medicinal, let's say, medicinal sand and clay. And here, actually, our Tour fortress was founded in 13th century. Here to these salt lakes, people were coming from different places to produce the salt, and in the 18th century to ensure their protection and the southern borders of our country. In those days, they built a fortress store. Tatars actually attacked this fortress for several centuries, repeatedly, and more than once. They completely ruined that, and they were taken prisoners when they sold the prisoners to slavery. After the Russian-Turkish War, the entire fortress ceased to become a kind of fortification, and the city was renamed as Slovyansk in order to commemorate the victory of the Slovak people over the Turks. So this became the city of merchants, the trade city, the city of trade, and up to the end of the 19th century, when we had this kind of Kursk-Kharkov railroad, that was a small town, but with the incoming of the foreign capital, and actually they used our mineral resources. I'm talking about the chalk and clay, the salt. They started to build different factories and then start industrial projects to excavate or to produce the minerals. So at the turn of the 20th century it became a rather large industrial city with up to 50 industrial projects. Then our history is very much similar to the history of Ukraine. We lived through different historical moments, and everything is what I mentioned is reflected in a display or exhibits of our museum. I'm sorry, cannot somehow. Okay, now it works. This is the external view of our museum. It was built in 1970. It's located now. It occupies the old estate. We have only 390 square meters, and on those premises, actually all our displays situated, or our museum is situated, and occupies almost 390 square meters. Okay, I'm going just to very quickly browse through a kind of slideshow for you. The museum has the 4 departments: nature, old history, new history, and contemporary history. So we have a very nice collections of different exhibits in our museum. While Severodonetsk, they complain that they do not have anything to show. We have a lot to show to the people. We have several thousand of original exhibits associated with culture, history, and actually those are regarded to be one of the best exhibits of the Donetsk region. Actually, we did not suffer at all as a result of the ATO, anti-terrorist operation, despite the fact that Slovyansk was the place where those events started, and we have witnessed all those fightings at the Maria, which is located 15 meters from our museum. So we have witnessed when we came to work in the early morning. We saw that some people in the uniforms with the submachine guns were standing near our museum. We couldn't even enter the museum, but we established quite a business relations with the militants, and we managed to preserve the complete stocks of our museum. Only the separatists, actually the rebels, they stole one of our guns, but on the 5th of through May 2014 they stole those guns or cannons, and a year later they returned that. So we did not suffer any loss. So now today we face the era of development, of further development of our museum. Our exhibit or our display includes our ceramist Silchenko, which a kind of eye-catcher for the visitors of our museum, and actually the people from who organized this forum, they also noticed those artifacts or the craftsmen, and they paid attention that we have quite a lot of artist pieces of our artistic. Actually, we entertained the idea to restore, or let's say to create a new museum room or hall of art. But we have a limited space, but we revisited our display, and we decided we can actually make a more compacted disposition, or let's say exposition, I mean, and to vacate some space for make room for some other display. Also, we have another person who deserves respect and attention. Anton Lapov was born in our city. His relatives sent us his works from Moscow. They sent it. So we decided to kind of unite the works or the masterpieces of those two artists and to display them, put them in display in our museum. And we believe this is going to serve the noble cause of the artistic education. And I believe that soon many people will again start to come to our museum, visit our museum. Today the people are afraid of some military or combat operations. But you know, this is a quiet city now, and we hope that those people who would like to go to our resort city with the purpose of medical treatment or visit our museums, and our museum, I believe, must fill this space in the cultural heritage or history of our country. A few words about Mr. Maximchenko for you to understand what kind of person he is. She was born. I mean, she was born in our city. She entered the Kharkiv Artistic Institute, but then she graduated from the Surikov Institute of Arts in Moscow with the flying colors. And she became the member of the Union of Artists and Sculptors of the USSR. The art critic Tatiana Shulgina, while studying the creative work of this artist, from the different sculptural figurines to the plates, chandelier, different plaques, and just to mention a few different pieces of work of this artist. So this is the special room where we can find the exhibits, ceramic pieces of ceramic art. There's Slavonic ceramics here, you know, or earthenware. Here we have the masterpiece of Maximchenko, but here, this in our museum collection, we have the whole range of your craftsmanship. Those are the sculptures, figurines, the decorative plates, the plaques, decorative earthenware, again, some kind of 3D plates or 3D image plates, and those are couple of the pictures, canvases, which were of Konchalovsky. Once again, we have more than 3 pieces of works of this artist, and we can actually study the creative work of these artists, and we thoroughly studied that. And one of the articles was published in one of the almanacs of 2015 of Svitlograd. And we addressed our local authorities with this problem, with the proposal of this project. Nobody actually declined or refused our proposal, but they said that we should find alternative way for the finance of this project. This really requires some aid or assistance, because we need some kind to take care of the facelifting of this room, artistic decorative improvements. So if we set ourselves such a goal, I believe maybe not very soon, but we have to implement or translate our ideas into life. You can try to search for the grants, they said, but such grants, generally speaking, are not readily allocated for the purposes of museum. Another project which we would like to implement in our recreation park. We are talking about recreation of the Tor fortress. The fortress of the 17th century was a small one. It occupied the territory of 1 hectare. And we decided with this recreation park to restore this fortress on the territory of the park, in full scale, restoration. So we already did some calculation, so we are working on that, and I hope we'll do that. We had another very interesting project, creation of the Center of the History of Ceramics and the Craftsmanship. This project we actually started to develop several years back. It was included in the program of our cabinet ministers, in one of the resolutions of cabinet ministers. It contained the one of the item to create such a center in our location. But unfortunately, this remained only on the paper, and we cannot possibly implement this project today physically. We understand that in the days of when our city was a part of the combat activities, we suffered several billion hryvnia losses, and we were given the aid of several billion hryvnia, but this was used for the restoration of housing mostly. And what we need, some first priority task, and our city believes that we can still wait until our turn comes, you know. So we still waiting, and I hope we can do that. So please, welcome to come to our mineral lakes with the medicinal clay and sands, etc., dirt. And I hope that everybody present here have to go to Slovyansk to visit the museums and see everything with your own eyes. And we switch over to the next presentation. Should somebody have any questions, we will have this kind of the Q&A session with Q&A. The next to speak is an artist, Mr. Larion, who is going to present the project New History thanks to Donbass. And then we are going to have the Skype contact with our Anton Lapov, who is going to provide his comments. So Larion Lozovoy has the floor. Thank you for the opportunity given to me.
As Olga said already, I'm an artist. My position of today's presentation is rather specific, especially between all these museums employees. And that's why my speech will be that peculiar. In comparison with the usual way of museum functioning, historical and artistic, our project, Museum of Contemporary History of Donbass, is an attempt to build participatory museum, as it's called, devoted to the contemporary history of Donbass region, understood in wide terms from the beginning of independence of Ukraine till now. It was initiated from the initiative autumn last year, initiative of the former employee of Lugansk Regional Museum. Oh yes, I need to speak slower. Anton Lapov. Anton Lapov will speak after me, and the group of artists and museum activists in response to infrastructure crisis in museum sphere because of military conflict. Here there are three main lines of museum designation in new conditions. First of all, this museum as a place of social discussion. Second, museum and its critical function. And third, museum as a crossroad of arts practices and research on historic practices. First one, understanding of museum as a place of social discussion. We were thinking about the main function of museums, three fundamental functions of collection, showing, and keeping. And behind this function, the fourth function is forgot, that museum should create some relationship to be a kind of mediator for communications. And here the inspiring image was museum as a place of collection and reflection, where discussion is going on between the visitors, museum employees, and it happens in the exhibits in museum environment. And this discussion should be focused on collective understanding of the contemporary events or other historical events and other forms of their representation. Critical function of museum is before there was a certain image of standard Soviet ideological museum that saved partially but was transformed to post-Soviet museum as a kind of contemporary regional museum. So here now our goal is not to demolish but to keep. We have some institution that propose the visitor kind of narrative built around heroism, heroes, and usually it is presented in an aesthetic of some heroic and top-level events. Here everything is fine, and our process of this model started from claims of this model for objectivity and museum representation of something unique. And here there was intuition. The museum that I wanted to go shouldn't bring some objective truths, and it should reflect and understand its status as the author of specific narrative, and the object in this museum wouldn't hide their artificial nature. Very often they were made especially for the museum, and interpretation component of the exhibition wouldn't be hidden. It would be kind of museum that wouldn't say some final full stop in the discussions, but a kind of provocation for the doubts. They talked about arts museum, about historical museum. They say that it's a kind of orphanage for things, from critics, from investigations. There is such a position, and the critics of exhibit is interpreted in another way, and all the sentences are fixed, and they communicated through communicative trip. That's what I start my discussion from. And third line is closer to arts practice. The museum is a crossroad of arts and historical and research practices. It's connected to the trends that I feel as an artist, with historiographical turn, with special attention of artists to the social events. That is a kind of cooperation that should enrich both spheres. That's what inspired us to this project. And now I tell you what were our fears in this project and why we started acting. I want to describe you two challenges. These two challenges are as symmetric and equal for us, and they pushed us to the thinking about alternatives of museum representation. So about challenges, and the first one was discussed. That is the photograph from Lugansk Regional Museum. I won't take a lot of your time because we discussed it in details during the first panel. So we are talking about the location of museum from occupied territories and not availability of the most of their funds, but how it is connected to the factual requirement of the state to continue some traditional ways of work, to keep the existing models of museum functioning, and it is made in non-typical crisis conditions. And how what regional museum can propose to this challenge. And that was our first question. What would be our first museum corresponding to this challenge? Second challenge is, and it's more complicated to explain it. It is less obvious, because what you can see, it is the exhibition and fair of the precious stone in one of the Kyiv museum. I won't name it, but I think you will recognize it. Every museum employee knows about availability of special hall that can be rented for some commercial uses. It can be personal exhibition of the artist or anything else. And here, as we can see here, there is a kind of commercial area existing in most of arts museum and in some historical museums as well. But because of this commercial hot, visitors can't see permanent collections. It says about a trend to privatize the places of social use and their partial disappearance. That's one of the last non-privatized environment, but at the same time it starts representing somebody's interests. It's connected to state politics as well. I have 7 minutes more. Not just in Ukraine, but all over the world as well. As we are talking about the constant demand and they discussed and the kind of motivation for modernization, but at the same time we can see that specific action can threaten the primary function of the museum. And post-Soviet museum, historical or something else, I mean the transformation of museum into something progressive, focused on the shows. Maybe it's complicated to do it, and here we can remember last year law about decrease of dotation in social sphere, legalizing the renting of museum premises, because the museum was proposed to look money for themselves in some other places, not in the state budget, and it was pushed, but insufficient budgeting of these places, and it increased the dependence of these institutions from the local elites who are renting these premises constantly. And it became the topic of our second discussion in the format of exhibition that was organized also by Ukraine Crisis Media Center, when we discussed the challenges of the contemporary museum in the conditions of privatization and refocusing on cultural industry of shows. And as you know, that UFO at Lybitska metro station can disappear because it will be rebuilt into a shopping mall, and that UFO building is a kind of representation of scientific processes. On this primary stage, museum had its form, series of public discussions, interviews with participants of contemporary history in Severodonetsk, Mariupol, in other cities as well. Anton will tell us more details about it. I just want to show you how it all was started. Oleg, for example, he was at our kickoff meeting from Severodonetsk with the participants who, due to the conflict, are living now all over Ukraine. And now I would like to tell you about the two main principles of our work, and where we can see this participation element or pattern of our work. First of all, it's so-called bottom musification. What do I mean? The population of the region collects themselves artifacts, material objects, and together with artists, with facilitators, looking for the ways to use them. And that is a kind of standard bottom movement that started in that of 19th century. But here the important thing is it's an authoritarian right of museum employee to form some exhibition narrative. It was given to community, and non-specialists are involved actively into the process of collection formation of this future museum. Thanks to that, maybe there will be more histories not focused on some state legends like it was in the Soviet Union, and it will be more place for some micro stories, for some stories from normal life. And here there is a photo from private archive of active participant of resistance movement of miners at Donbass. It's one of the few photos that we have. Due to the conflict, most part of them are not available at the moment. And now this photo is a part of our virtual exposition. Second principle is focus on material sources. That is, we are moving from the object of material culture to some virtual object, to fixation of the memories, oral stories, some byproducts of different social processes. Here the question is what will transfer the historical experience better. It can be remembering the events of Euromaidan, for example. How did it start? From the post on social media and Facebook. So as we can see, these digital elements and artifacts have more and more weight on representation of historical events, and their mobility, their compactness in the conditions of this forced dislocation, fragmentation of museum funds can be plus. So that's virtual museums that can be placed on USB drive. For example, it can be more mobile and more corresponding situation in the crisis period as the one we have at the moment. And here we are thinking about museum positioning, why it can't compete with the regional communities, for example. In the eastern Ukraine, there are many of them, and very good people are doing that. It's a kind of bottom regional movement that it happens around discussions of the records of this community, not to repeat the same functions with these Facebook communities, for example. There are two objects that were added by IDPs. One of them is a citizen of Mariupol, the other one is a citizen of Donetsk. And they ask in what way to show non-material artifacts in museums. And on the bottom you can see a kind of wave. It is a field record of the sign of Donetsk steel plant. Everybody knows that sound because few times a day you could hear that sound from the steel plant, and it was associated with the memories about these cities and those times. And it was interrupted only one time during a counter-terroristic operation. And this object is very important for the to feel that place, to feel the history of its citizen. But the question is how to represent it. And also you can see that this is the art of the local citizen of Mariupol. It can say much more about social process in this city than some historiographical records. At least there is some fresh way of looking at it. And to finish, how we can see the Museum of Contemporary History. Autotech Puzzle. It's a kind of mobile communication platform. It's not the part of the current museum collection of any museum, but from it you can understand what is the object of exposition, what museum employees are doing, and this issue we are still trying to describe. We can see museum in the discussion around the things, objects, material and non-material, presence of these objects, and what we call some virtual imaginatory initiative of the museum. We are not trying to create a kind of institution for grand narratives or anything else. We are just trying to facilitate the process. We initiate this communicative museological situation as it is so-called. And that situation is a project of Autotech Contemporary Museum. I understand completely that this way of speaking about museum is contrasting to pure materiality of the tasks that museum employees have in that frontline areas. Redislocation, search for funds, education of the new employees instead of those employees that were lost. I understand that this discussion is contemporary and it can give us a new way to interpret contemporary history. And I think there are possibilities to continue our work in the context of initiatives that will be described by the following speakers. And
Thank you very much. During the first panel, they mentioned that the kind of music kind of exaggeration, but Larion actually proved us that we can do without any special premises, but we can follow this project implementation on the website, the modern presentation of modern museum project in Donbass. And please, we expect our connections, Skype connection with Anton Lapov. We cannot see him, but we can hear him. I copy you well. You have the floor. Thank you for the invitation sent to me. I'm sorry without the visualization because I'm beyond the boundaries we current today. So if you're talking about my motivation, which actually prompted myself or the Larion to start this project, I constantly paid attention to the problems of reflection of the modern history in a specific museum, and I was part of the Lugansk local lore museum. I believe the adequacy of the reflection of our recent past, which is not too distant from us today, can have a good potentiality in order to establish dialogue and mutual understanding, not only between those people who today reside on the liberated parts of the Lugansk region, but also to establish dialogue with those our citizens which have to return to Ukraine or remain where they wish to live. On the other hand, it does not cancel the principle, some kind of of humanitarian development of this region. That's why this museum of late, we start to think about that. I mean, with some other activists, this can promote the establishment of social communication, not just to find some kind of common topics, reflection of historical events or whatever, but Larion quite completely informed me about our, the history of our project. For a long time, this project was kind of discussion platform in the form of just discussions, more or less open, with some specific personalities. And over the last 1 or 2 months, we've been developing the idea to create tripartite project, which will consist of 3 components. As Oleg already mentioned during the first panel session, that this could be a kind of self-sufficient form of the museum, kind of the backbone, or let's say framework, exposition framework, against the background of which we can take care of different kind of activities, which Larion was talking about in the form of different discussions, which can facilitate establishing the communication between with the more active citizens, with the more active portion of our community, and maybe with some individual persons who can have some different ideas. And the third part, we can talk about some kind of workshops, and we actually are working on one of those today, which can be implemented. I mean, this idea together with the UCMC, the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, and Seversky Donetsk. Also, we are in the course of negotiations with the organization Fresh Source. And again, we can talk about the workshops can be related for the activization of the cultural environment in Severodonetsk, because there is no sense to deal only with some museums directly related things, because one of the workshops we are working on is related to the development of media awareness of the people, and I will put this way, active citizens which can master the modern ways and methods of audio recording or some podcasts of the radio broadcasting, and they can not only create or register some historical evidence, but also they can offer their alternative media platforms. This is just a general description or general idea. Much will depend upon the specific factors, and definitely my opinion is this is beyond the public sector. This is our idea. I mean, our. Thank you, Anton. We had Anton Lapov and Larion Lozovoy. We call upon you to visit their pages on Facebook and get involved. If you have some ideas, please write about those. Next project we are going to discuss today, the Lugansk Art and Facts, a virtual platform which will contain artifacts of cultural life and modern life in Lugansk region in the period 2004-2014. And I give the floor to Yaroslav Minkin, social activist and cultural innovator. Hi. Good afternoon. In fact, this is first time for me to speak and address such a community. I represent the artistic environment, and several years ago I couldn't even imagine that I would have a chance to address such an audience, and that I would be talking about museification, because to me this is something very important, very complex, which I don't know how to put it, that a lot of effort and time and years must be contribute to this idea. And we're talking about the idea which we are going to implement, which we started together with the Giri Institute in Ukraine and one of the Berlin museums. The matter is that, generally speaking, how this idea was born. In a certain period of time, our organization started to work with such a complex topic as stereotypes in the society and stereotypes associated with the IDPs. And we came to understand one of the major stereotypes which exist today is the fact that we know about the Donbass or Donetsk or the Lugansk regions as the regions which never had anything like cultural life or public activity, and that's why this actually led to the situation we have today. If we are going to talk about Donbass area, generally speaking, about the Lugansk region, Lugansk specifically, to many people in Ukraine and almost to all the people beyond the boundaries of Ukraine, Lugansk looks like that, as you can see that in this picture. And we understood that we cannot today speak global like our previous colleagues because they put a very high level of their objectives and can only congratulate them on that. But we start to deal with what we can do in Lugansk, using such mechanisms as the cultural mapping to create easily understood virtual museum within a certain period of time between the end of the revolution of Orange Revolution 2004 till the Revolution of Dignity of 2014, without touching this kind of the layer we were talking about. We decided that our virtual platform, our virtual museum, is not going to be the place for discussions, but it is going to be exclusively used for the collection of those artifacts, which in our opinion, and in the opinion of our colleagues from Germany, will be more topical and interesting not only to the Ukrainian audience, but also for the English-speaking audience, because our virtual museum is going to be bilingual. But we hope after the Ukrainian and English language, we also will take care of the German language, Russian language, maybe Chinese, I don't know. So that's why we have a rather specific objectives of our projects. Number one, we would like to create a virtual or creative museum which would serve as a platform to preserve or to host, which could be attached upon, which cannot be, in English we call it tangible and intangible products. Number two, to support the process of building dialogue and reconciliation in Ukraine, and to show what specifically took place in Lugansk, and just an ordinary city in the extreme east of Ukraine. Number three, to try and to create a model for other cultural managers, our colleagues, and for our colleagues from other regions or other countries of the eastern neighborhood countries, and those countries which lived through some conflicts and maybe which experience the need to preserve certain components of their cultural heritage. To some people, for some people who live in Lugansk is mostly associated with this. Just for the sake of comparison for the foreigners or those people who never visit Lugansk, they have the idea of Lugansk of this kind in this picture, and those people who visited Lugansk or they visited some cultural events, their idea of Lugansk is something like that. For the people who were deeply involved in the Lugansk life, they have this or this idea of our city. So we would like to demonstrate that indeed, even in the ordinary city of the Donbass area, they used to have the cultural life and social movements. And what happened to Donbass area could be the case in some other regions of Ukraine. Maybe not in all of them, but in certain regions of Ukraine. And we would like to show what major events took place there. So what objects we are going to collect. And I immediately would like to address you because we plan to collect it from the collectionists. Those people who have some interest in materials, for example, Nasser has some interest, evidence, whatever. What we actually going to collect? We are going to collect the information about some cultural figures and public figures, about artistic and social movements, about specific places which were kind of cult related, and artifacts, including books, pictures, canvases, photos, musical records or recordings, etc., etc. So, on one hand, we collecting just just objects. Some time ago, they called it kind of modern contemporary art. We had some exhibition. We had a plus minus 15 exhibition. And it turned out to be that over the last 3 years, it became a kind of fact of life. Oh, or the fact which is questioned now. In this way, we can see what we did in Lugansk, or our colleagues did in Lugansk. This is not any longer a fact, but a kind of a myth. And sometimes, actually, I myself think that I start to tell some myths to the people, or whether it was really a reality or just a myth. So this is the way it's going to look like. On our website, there will be different categories with major key elements. We have two positions, actually. We collect separately the archives, which is not going to be put on our virtual museum on display, and our curators, or museum curators, are going to select certain artifacts which could be of most interest to the international community or the Ukrainian citizens, which would be interesting to present on our own platform. It's important to add that our target audience is not only Ukrainians. First of all, we are talking about the researchers in Europe, in the United States, in Ukraine, maybe in Asia, who can use those facts for their further research or research projects. So I mean to say that this is meant not only for the users of cultural products, but the recipients of cultural products, but also for those who would like to have an in-depth view or understand of the situation. Musical bands, etc., etc. We, as an artistic organization, we cannot do that on our own, and we're trying to do that in partnership with the Goethe Institute in Ukraine, and with the assistance of another museum, Friedrichstein Razmik Museum in Berlin, which actually specializes in a preservation of a history of the residents, which found themselves in the center, in the heart of the migration district in Berlin. And they actually are involved in collection of the modern contemporary history. This is our small team, members of our team, and I'm going to show this slide, how Lugansk looks to me, something like that, and I hope that many of you, if you do not remember this kind of Lugansk, city of Lugansk, at least after we'll be able to bring here this museum and to show to the people those artifacts which will be able to preserve or to collect or to gather, you'll have such a happy and diverse feelings and sensations of the city, which unfortunately doesn't exist any longer. That's all. Thank you very much. Actually, you heard some calls. Should you have any artifacts, send it to Yaroslav. This is really very interesting. We amass or accumulate more and more experience. We have to preserve it somehow. Maybe the internet, some virtual resources will be instrumental in providing this opportunity to us. We are going to switch over to the next project, which was our colleagues from the UCMC and all our artistic figures and experts who traveled with us for the last 2 years in the eastern parts of Ukraine. This is a common idea of ours, and constantly we were tearing ourselves between two ideas. For example, why should we build something new on the territory which is constantly in the area of risks? On the other hand, maybe such virtual projects will help us to preserve this history, and nothing will damage it. No weapon can damage it. Actually, the Svitlograd project will be presented today by Leonid Maruschak, curator of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center Art Initiative, and our dear colleagues, Monsieur Jean de Lannoy, Deputy Ambassador of the Kingdom of Belgium to Ukraine. You are welcome. Make yourself convenient, more comfortable on this platform, or just from here.
I will speak to you a little bit about what seems to me like the forerunner of the project Svitlograd, because that's how the Belgian embassy was involved. So we were approached by the team of UCMC to support a project to show an exhibition about the history of Donbass, about the history of Belgium in Donbass, around the different cities that are still in the government-controlled area. And you will ask yourself, yes, why history of Belgium in Donbass? And I will briefly explain that Belgium used to be a very rich industrial country. It still is, but it was one of the first to industrialize. And so it came quickly to places like Donbass and built factories, mine, railways. And that is a history that is important to rediscover today, and it's a theme that is so useful for museums, even though it's in the past and it's not based on what is alive today in contemporary art. But it's important because the perception of Donbass inside and outside is linked to the Soviet myth of Soviet Donbass, that the Soviet Union made Donbass entirely, and it's also in many aspects a bloody myth, because this construction of Donbass is linked to the massacres of the decolocalization and the collectivization of agriculture. So many people in Donbass have that view that they are the product of the Soviet Union, and many people in Ukraine also have that view of Donbass and Donbass people as a product of the Soviet Union. With our history, we come and show that the origins of industrial Donbass were much more peaceful. There were countries like Belgium, but also France and Germany that came and invested and built already an industrial, a large industrial tool in Donbass. And that history was then eclipsed in the Soviet period, although people locally still have some knowledge. They know there is a factory here, or there are some Belgian houses, there are some French houses in another city. But the overall view has been forgotten, and the overall view also in the whole of Ukraine, that there is another Donbass. The origins of Donbass are European, they are peaceful. That was also lost. And so through historical project, cultural project, we can come and we have an important political message that brings hopes by showing that the identity of Donbass is more complex than just a Soviet identity. At the same time, it is important for us as well because we talk to activists when we go to Donbass. We talk to cultural activists and hear what are their ideas to heal the wounds of the recent past and of a more distant past. We also hear more militant activists who want to fight against corruption or help the fight in the anti-terrorist operation. But also, and I think Leonid will talk more in detail about that, we are trying to see what part of the heritage is still standing, the buildings. And so we have found that in Lysychansk there was a very big Belgian factory of which several buildings stand and some of them empty. So we are trying to have ideas on having new use for those buildings, and one of the ideas from UCMC is to make a cultural space in it. So these are very interesting projects that we want to explore and support. So here you are. It is not so much about the project itself, but of making the museum, but it's about content, and it's about going deeper into the history, because that is also important for healing wounds in Donbass, in Ukrainian society, and building the future of Ukraine.
Дуже дякую, Жан.
Thank you very much, Jean. Our joint project became a kind of discovery for us as well, and we are still in the process. Thank you very much. I started our day and I will finish it. But before we finish our conference, I want to tell you about one more project called Svitlograd. The presentation is on the screen. The idea to create this project appeared when we first time visited Severodonetsk and has been to the plant Severoazot. And we knew a lot of interesting things there, but one of them was the following. We've been told that when Soviet history just started, new traditional period to build new cities. It was connected to big industrial cities. It was connected to the fact that Soviet system couldn't fight all the Ukrainian during the industrialization. That's why they built new cities. Sometimes the city were very new in the plain field. Sometimes they were on the base of some small villages. It happened to Donetsk, to Lugansk, to Severodonetsk. The story is the following. In 1934, the decision was taken next to the city of Lysychansk. That wasn't the city at that time. It was just a number of small settlements around the plant, and this place was called Severodonetsk, and between the settlements the plant was created, nitrogen plant, and there was Rubezhny also neighboring to it, and in the plans of Soviet system there was the idea to connect Lysychansk and Rubezhny and call it Svitlograd or Mendeleevsk. What for they did it you can imagine, but under condition that it could happen only when Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, all Ukrainian and European will disappear. Unfortunately or fortunately, I can't judge it, and didn't happen. That's why the plan was not completed. The cities were not joined. Severodonetsk started developing as separate city. From the very beginning, it was planned to be a regional center. It was moved to Lugansk then, and the plan wasn't executed. And even between the exhibit of that museum, we saw passports that were given to the citizens of Severodonetsk with the stamp Svitlograd. We knew about the story, and we decided to join these three cities that are neighboring to each other. And talking about Severodonetsk now, and we told it many times already, it is the regional center of Lugansk region. Lysychansk and Rubizhne are next to Severodonetsk. There are 1.52 kilometers between them, and common population is almost 250,000. As local citizens told them, there is an investigation about it. These cities are not in good relationship, notwithstanding the fact that they are very close to each other, and we decided to join these cities. And on the next slide, you can see these three cities. You can see how close they are to each other. They are divided just by Seversky Donetsk River. Lysychansk seems to be much more bigger, but that's because there are more one-story buildings there, and during combat actions in the east of Ukraine in these places, the bridge was demolished that joined the cities. There were two bridges before. One of them is demolished. Now it's been renovated. But and because of that, cities didn't communicate so much to each other as before, and more attention is on Severodonetsk side. Lysychansk and Rubizhne is remembered less these times, and the idea was to connect these three cities without connecting their infrastructures, and the goal of the project is looking for platforms that will be communicative base for these three cities. We understood that museum can be this kind of platform. In Lysychansk and Rubizhne there are museums, in Severodonetsk there is no museum, but these museums can't make this function because they can't involve the new visitors and can't reevaluate the events that happened, and they still happen. That's why the idea of museum is very actual, but we understood on the first stages that it's not possible to build a normal full-scope museum, and that's why we addressed the favorite topic of the last time, virtual museum. But the creation of this virtual museum is to invite experts on this topic from all corners of Ukraine, from all over the world, artists, painters, as a specialist in museum business, and to work out all these ideas. And on the first stage, it will be in the format of virtual museum. That's one of the problems we saw. The name of this museum next to Severazov, I'm not sure is it called like that or not. And I think that probably yes, but that is a different story. So I told you about the problems we had. And when we address the execution of the ideas, the most important what we lacking was infrastructure. Cultural infrastructure that could provide it. We have a big team, the team that is ready to work on this project. There are a lot of researchers, historians, artists, local, and those who were displaced from the occupied territories, some local citizens, all Ukrainian and international experts. First of all, it takes a lot of time to take to these cities, because it takes 16 hours by train, and after that you need a car to take there. Second, there is a lack of premises that can be used as a part of this project, and the third problem is a platform where it was possible to communicate with everybody, not just with people who will come, but also with local citizens. And the most important, to investigate the form of investigation that can be used as a permanent form. We decided that the tradition of artist expedition shall be continued, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have premises, that we don't have possibility to transport a lot of people and work with them. We kept on moving and investigating the region and these places, and one of these trips was the project of international investment into Ukraine in the end of 19th, beginning of 20th century. The first part was Belgium, and during this time we worked with local community. We placed the exhibition that was created by Dnipro Historical Museum named after Vernadsky. There were 19 posters that should be exhibited. We located them in Severodonetsk on the territory of Palace of Culture, but in Lysychansk there was a museum. That's why we located our exhibition in museum in Lysychansk. And we also visited all Belgian heritage that is still in Lysychansk. And among this Belgian heritage, we found very well kept buildings. For example, that is a former childish polyclinic that was built by Belgian people at the end of 19th century, and as a result of the recent event it was not used as hospital, and I think it was in the balance sheet of the cities, and it should be transferred into the balance sheet of the region. And our idea is to open cluster based on this building, I mean arts and culture cluster. It will be a platform where all the things can be communicated. What is interesting, this building should provide not the just function of collection and transferring the information. Also, we can use it as a hostel where everybody who wants to be involved in this project can live. Unfortunately, there is no Zhenya Moller with me who could tell us about the strategy of popularization and investigation of this research, but this place would be very successful at the very beginning. The place where we can gather, the place where we can live, where researchers who can be involved in this topic could live, and where these researchers could be represented in different formats and choose the form of presentation that are perceived by target audience. That's briefly. And when we addressed Belgian embassy with the idea to support this project, Belgians were very glad to do it, because they thought that that is the destiny of their heritage in these abolished premises. It would be the best destiny for them. And there are so many objects like this in Donetsk and Lugansk region. In Konstantinivka, for example, in Kramatorsk, in Mariupol also there are some objects as well. We could use them for these targets, and I think that Europeans could be interested to support these structures, and it would give them possibility to understand where we could take funds for this idea. When we started working on this project, we understood that it would be perspective to materialize this museum, and we don't refuse from this idea, and sooner or later we will need to start building in Ukraine not just renovated premises that were not created as museums, but we will create new museums, new state institutions for the requirements of humanitarian politics of Ukraine, because during 25 years of the independence of Ukraine, there are no contemporary, highly progressive museums still. We didn't build even one in the independence of Ukraine, notwithstanding the facts that notwithstanding the events that are going on the territory of Ukraine, on the territory of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. This process needs to be started. That's briefly about our Svitlograd project. It's an open project. We are trying to involve into this project all shareholders, because first of all we create this process for everybody, and I would like to thank you for listening to us. We will finish our conference. I want to say That's not the end of discussion of the actual problems of museums and humanitarian politics of Ukraine, and I would like to announce the next stage and the next topic of the conference. It will be the search and involvement of funds, where to look for it, with who to cooperate, who can help us in this direction. I think we will need some time to prepare, and after that we will invite wider audience. Maybe we want this hall won't be enough for all interested people, but we invite everybody for cooperation for the building of our bright future. Thank you very much. See you next time.